Hello and welcome to this lecture video. In this lecture video, I'm going to continue my discussion of step costs. I'm also going to talk about the activity base, the concept of the activity base, and the relevant range. And then I'm also going to talk quickly or at a high level about cost estimation methods. And then I'm going to talk in more detail about one specific cost estimation method called account analysis, and then quickly talk about the scatter graph approach. Okay? So I want to come back to this idea of step costs. And what I was saying in the prior lecture video is that a step cost basically says that a resource may be obtainable in large chunks. And what we're saying here is maybe maintenance workers. And so what I was drawing is I was saying, let's say that from 0 to maybe 100 units that we make, we only need 5 maintenance workers. But then as we go from 100 to maybe come down here and say 200 units, we actually have to have some new machines to help us out. And then what we have to do is hire another maintenance worker. So now we have 6. But you can see is that the number of maintenance workers stays constant up until some point, and then it jumps up like this. Okay, because we have to add another maintenance workers. And so what we're saying over here is that maybe small changes in production that, from 10 to 20 units doesn't mean we need to hire more full-time maintenance workers, because maybe those 5 workers that we have, we can pay them a little bit more overtime. Maybe as we get from 80 to 90 or 90 to 100 units, they might be stretched. They might be working a lot, but we can pay them some overtime, or we can ask that they work a little bit more. But eventually it's going to be too much. It's just too much for them to deal with, and we have to hire an additional worker. And so then what happens is when we hire that additional full-time worker on a salary basis, our fixed costs, it'd be a fixed cost because it's salary, would increase because we moved from 5 workers to 6 workers. Okay? And so that's what we're staying with, the idea of step costs. With the concept activity base is what we're saying over here is for a cost to be variable, it must increase or decrease with respect to the activity base. An activity base could be units sold, okay, units produced, or as I was saying earlier, we have an IT help desk here at the University of Mary Washington. When somebody has a computer problem, they go down to the help desk, and what's the first thing that the help desk gives you? They give you a help desk ticket number. Okay, so if you think about what's the activity base, what's driving the costs of the help desk? The number of help desk tickets, right? The number of help desk tickets. So as the number of help desk tickets goes up, the help desk might have to hire some additional part-time student workers to help them out, to help them to answer the phones and help them solve some of these help desk tickets. Okay, so help desk tickets, when we look at the variable costs of the IT help desk, and there are some fixed costs in the IT help desk, such as the salaried people who work there, but then there are also some variable costs with the IT help desk, such as the hourly student workers. As we have more help desk tickets, we might have to hire more hourly student workers. In that case, the variable costs of the IT help desk would increase with respect to the number of help desk tickets. So the activity base for an IT help desk would be number of help desk tickets, because the variable costs would increase or decrease with respect to the number of help desk tickets. Okay, so it doesn't always have to be units sold or units produced. It could be help desk tickets for the IT help desk. Okay. Linearity assumption, what we're basically saying is that the variable cost per unit stays the same. The variable cost per unit stays the same, which is kind of what we've been assuming all the time, right? So we assume a linear relationship, a linear slope, right? It's a constant slope. It's not curve linear, okay? That's what we're not assuming. We're assuming it's linear, and therefore, basically, the variable cost per unit stays the same. When we look at the relevant range, this is another concept here in cost volume profit analysis. And with the relevant range is what we say is that our assumptions about total FC, total fixed costs, staying constant and variable cost per unit staying constant hold true. So remember, those are our assumptions that we've been talking about, that total fixed costs stay the same and that variable costs per unit also stay the same. And what we say is that in this relevant range, those assumptions hold true. Okay? So it could be a situation where maybe if a company is buying in large quantities, right? And if they hit some really large quantity of purchasing raw materials, for example, that maybe their supplier gives them a discount. Okay? And so if that were to happen, right, maybe our raw materials cost per unit could go down. Well, what we've been talking about, remember, raw materials, those materials costs, those are variable costs. And so what we've been saying so far is that our variable costs per unit are constant. So therefore, our materials cost per unit stay the same. But what I'm saying, and it could be in a situation that if we buy in a really large quantity, right, that our variable cost per unit could decrease because our supplier gives us a price break, a discount in price, because we bought in large quantities. If that's the case, maybe what we say is that from $0 to $1,000 in purchases of raw materials, the raw materials cost is $1 per unit. And then what we could say is maybe from 1,000 to 2,000, it decreases to 99 cents per unit. And what if this is true, this would be relevant range 1, and then 1,000 to 2,000 would be RR, relevant range 2. So we would have two different relevant ranges. Okay? In the context of this class, we're not really getting into this. We're assuming this away. We're just saying that variable cost per unit stays the same because we are within the relevant range. Okay? So let's look at these quick check problems. We can say which of the following statements about cost behavior are true. So what I want you to do is I want you to stop the lecture video and I want you to answer this quick check problem and then restart it and come back and check your answer. Okay, so let's see how you did. So fixed costs per unit vary with the level of activity. Yes, that's true. Remember we talked about at the beginning of the chapter how fixed costs per unit decrease as activity increases. Remember I gave the example about rent per customer. As we have more customers, rent per customer goes down. Variable costs per unit are constant within the relevant range. Yes, that is our assumption right up here about the relevant range. We say our variable costs per unit stay constant. And even up here, we had two different relevant ranges, but within that relevant range, our variable cost, or in this case, our materials cost per unit, stayed the same. All I was saying is up here is if it is a higher quantity, maybe because we get a discount from our supplier, that maybe what happens is that our materials cost per unit decrease, which would therefore decrease our variable cost per unit. Okay? But that would be in a separate relevant range. And so I'm saying within each relevant range, that does hold true. Total fixed costs are constant within the relevant range. Yes. Okay? total variable costs are constant within the relevant range. No. Total variable costs would still increase or decrease even within the relevant range. The variable cost per unit stay constant within the relevant range. Okay. Say in order here, let's talk about let's talk about cost estimation methods. Okay. So when we talk about cost estimation methods, what we're saying is that in order to predict costs at different levels of activity, we have to know about cost behaviors. And we know about that. We know about how variable costs behave, how fixed costs behave, and also we can parse a mixed cost into its variable and fixed components. Okay? So one of the things that we want to do is be able to estimate our costs. Why do we want to estimate our costs? Well, if we can estimate what our costs will be at different levels of sales, at different levels of production and different levels of sales, and we also know what our price is on the units that we sell, then we can estimate what our profit will be at different levels of sales. And that's something we absolutely want to know. Okay? So one way that we can estimate costs is through something called account analysis. There's also the scatter graph approach, high-low, and regression. So account analysis is a common method. Okay, it's a common method for cost estimation. And it uses, I'll write that down here, uses professional judgment. Okay, so with account analysis, it's kind of more of an easier approach. It uses professional judgment, and it helps us to separate out our mixed costs into its variable and fixed components, and then perform some different estimation of what our total costs would be at different levels of production and different levels of sales. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stop this lecture video now, and then in the next lecture video I'm going to go through this example of account analysis, okay, to really bring home the idea of how we do account analysis and how it works. Thanks.